Good afternoon and welcome to the Indispensable Role of the Medical Review Officer, brought to you by Current Consulting Group and sponsored by DrugPack. We're excited to hear from today's webinar sponsor, so let's go ahead and turn this over to DrugPack.
Hi, I'm David Gonsalves, General Manager of DrugPack. We're excited to be sponsoring today's presentation on the indispensable role of the MRO. Before I turn the time over to Bill Current of the Current Consulting Group, I want to share a few things about DrugPack that I think you'll find interesting. When DrugPack first came out more than 30 years ago, it was really the only comprehensive drug testing management software of its kind. Of course, back in 1988, DrugPack was an off-the-shelf product, built to meet the needs of drug testing providers then and into the foreseeable future. As Bill will talk about today, the industry continues to evolve as it grows, and so does DrugPack. One area that is important today, as it has always been, is the medical review process. A consistent and comprehensive review that includes a donor interview for confirmed laboratory positive, adulterated, or substituted results is key to a defensible drug testing program. To help MROs work in a more efficient and consistent manner, we at DrugPack created an add-on module called MRO Pro. While the DrugPack software itself can process results from start to finish, this module allows MROs to work simply, efficiently, and interview donors distraction-free. The module is complete with the ability to preload questions, doctor's notes, and create checklists for the doctors to follow. Whether you have one MRO or several, MRO Pro will help make the review process easier and better.
As a drug testing professional, you need to do more than just process test results. You need to be responsive, ensure quality, communicate with your team and your customers, and watch your bottom line. For over 30 years, companies like yours have trusted DrugPack to help manage every aspect of their drug testing programs. Today, DrugPack offers a fully hosted, cloud-based system that is secure, scalable, and mobile-friendly. Whether you have one location or many, 2 users or thousands of them, they all can use DrugPack from any modern browser on any operating system, desktop, tablet, or mobile phone, anytime, day or night. DrugPack can help you manage your result processing of DOT and non-mandated testing, including alternative sample types, and more. In fact, DrugPack's workflows and third-party integrations comprise a complete ecosystem for your entire testing service. But the real power of DrugPack is in its flexible automation. Data imports, quality control, medical review and release, electronic fax and paper reporting, invoice generation, scientifically valid random selections, and more can all be automated as much or as little as you like. Set up rules to automate just the processes you want to, under precise conditions that you define. Our cloud-based system runs around the clock 365 days a year, doing this work for you. DrugPack helps you harness the power of the latest technologies to control, automate, and oversee your business, anytime, anywhere. To learn more, visit drugpack.com. There you can watch more videos, explore our Knowledge Center, or contact our sales team. You can even experience DP Web for yourself, risk-free, on our live demo.
The DrugPack of today is a web-based, comprehensive, flexible, and fully scalable management system that makes it possible for TPAs and MROs to meet their clients' needs in a streamlined, cost-effective manner. DrugPack is also used by employers to manage their own random pools and test results. This gives employers the ability to run reports and store their data in-house. In other words, the 2022 version of DrugPack is much more robust and state-of-the-art, meeting the drug and alcohol testing program needs of both employers and drug testing service providers. If you haven't taken a close look at DrugPack lately, or if you're a current user but you haven't fully investigated all of the advanced features we offer, please contact us. We'll be happy to walk you through all of the features of today's DrugPack. Thanks for your time. And now it's time to hear from Bill Current on the indispensable role of the MRO.
Okay, well, thank you, David, for turning the mic over to me. I'm going to be co-presenting today with my partner at Current Consulting Group, Rick Tennant. Our bios are on the screen. You can take a look at that. Rick's been in the drug testing industry for over 25 years. And all I'll say is that I've been in the industry even longer than that. I don't like to admit exactly how long, but it's been over 30 years. We started the Current Consulting Group in 1998, and in a recent survey, we were voted the #1 recognized brand in drug testing consulting in the industry. So we're very proud of that. Next year, in 2023, we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary, and so we're going to have a lot of special, exciting things going on for that. For today's presentation, we're going to talk about, obviously, the indispensable role of the medical review officer, and that's a subject I like to talk about because I'm a big proponent of doing drug testing the right way. So we're going to have an introduction, which I'm going to take care of. I'm going to share some stats to sort of set the stage, and then Rick will take us through sort of the meat of today's presentation. I'll come back in a little bit later to talk about state laws as they pertain to the use of medical review officers, and then we'll entertain questions from our attendees today. We invite you to ask any questions that you would like pertaining to today's subject or anything else related to drug testing. We're happy to entertain those for you. So let's first start with some as part of our introduction, some statistics about the current magnitude of the problem. Now, if you attend our webinars, you know these next two slides I use a lot. This is from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. It's an annual report that comes out from the federal government. It measures the numbers of people who admit to being illicit drug users and alcohol abusers. 59.3 million Americans 12 and older admit to using illicit drugs, and 138.5 million admit to using alcohol. Now, that doesn't mean they're alcohol abusers, but look at those last two bullets there. Over 61 million would be classified as binge drinkers, having 5 or more drinks on at least one occasion in the past month, and 17.7 million being heavy drinkers, meaning they had 5 or more drinks on at least 5 occasions in the last month. And these numbers are going to come in handy in a couple of slides, but this kind of gives you the big picture. And the #1 illicit drug of abuse, no surprise there, it's marijuana. You can see that there was a significant jump from 2019 to 2020. We do expect the psychotherapeutic category to go up when the new report comes out. This report is always 1 year behind. So the 2021 report reflected statistics from 2020. And so when the 2022 report comes out, it will reflect statistics from 2021. But marijuana, the #1 drug of abuse. Now, on the next slide, you'll see that there are 3 things that are really sort of driving this marijuana issue. Of course, legalization is one of the main drivers of the increase in marijuana use throughout the country. And you can see that between 2002 and 2020, marijuana use among adults 26 and older increased from 7% to nearly 20%. That is a huge, huge difference, increase in about an 18-year period. And part of that is because the perceived risk of harm in smoking marijuana on a regular weekly basis declined from 36.3% to 27.4%. And what that means is that a lot more people, as you see at the bottom there, a lot more people are experimenting with marijuana. Millions of people try marijuana for the first time each year. Every year, Quest Diagnostics puts out something called the Drug Testing Index, the DTI. I love this report. It's something very generous that they share with the whole drug testing industry and with employers that shows the positivity rates by drug, by type of test, by whether it's a DOT test or a non-DOT test. And in the latest DTI, the positivity rates for marijuana in the general workforce, not counting DOT, based on more than 6 million urine tests, so not counting the oral fluid and the hair tests that they do, continued an upward climb, increasing 8.3% between 2020 and 2021, which represents the highest positivity rate ever reported in all the years, over 2 decades now, that Quest has been issuing the DTI. As you see in that third bullet, over 5 years, the positivity for marijuana in the general U.S. workforce increased 50% between 2017 and 2021. And the greatest increase has come from states that have legalized recreational use of marijuana, up 118% between 2012 and 2020. Now look at that last bullet. The overall positivity rate in the combined U.S. workforce, that's DOT and non-DOT together, over 9 million urine tests between January and December of 2021, was up in 2021 to 4.6% compared to 4.4% in 2020, and up 31.4% from the all-time low of 3.5% just 10 years ago. Now, this is not a new study, but it's something that we recently came across. This is from an annual report on substance abuse that is issued every year and reported by Business Wire. It showed that substance abuse, 1 year into the pandemic, alcohol and other substance use was affecting 49% of American workers. So as not to paraphrase and mess up the sort of nuances of the report, I put the exact quotes in here. Of the 49% of workers who reported struggling with some level of addiction, the number of workers reporting lower productivity or missed work because of substance abuse or addiction has nearly doubled since 2019, with 36% further reporting that it has affected their work more since the pandemic began. Nearly half of full-time workers now report problem use of alcohol, drugs, or prescription medication, and 19% report at least weekly usage. So since the pandemic started, substance abuse, including alcohol and marijuana, of course, but also prescription drugs, has not only increased, but it's affecting workers. Their productivity is down, their attendance is down, and it's having a dramatic negative impact on the workplace. According to the National Safety Council, 75% of people with a substance abuse disorder are employed. That's about somewhere between 15 and 17% of the workforce. It's a significant percentage. That's 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6, about 1 out of 6 workers generally. A survey of employees conducted by the American Addiction Center found this. This was very interesting. Again, these are workplace statistics relative to substance abuse. 22.5% of employees admit to using drugs or alcohol at work. Different number than what we get from the federal government report, but nonetheless reliable. But look at that last bullet. 3.3% of those who go to a workplace, not remote workers, but to a workplace, admit to being high on the job every week. Every single week, high on the job. That's significant. Now, finally, the map on the right is the status of the legalization of marijuana. The orange states are states that have legalized recreational marijuana. The blue states are states that have legalized medical marijuana. And of course, all the orange states have also legalized medical marijuana. So we know from the drug testing index from Quest that positivity rate for marijuana is up significantly, dramatically, especially in those orange states, over 118%. This is from a different study that shows that the prevalence of simultaneous use of marijuana and alcohol almost twice as high as concurrent use, implying that individuals who use both cannabis and alcohol tend to do so at the same time. In other words, people who are smoking marijuana are also consuming alcohol at the same time. Second paragraph. Furthermore, simultaneous use was associated with increased frequency and quantity of alcohol use. So people who are smoking marijuana are also using alcohol at the same time, but they're using it more. They're using more alcohol. And then finally, simultaneous use was also the most detrimental. Compared to alcohol only, simultaneous use approximately doubled the odds of drunk driving, social consequences, and harms to self. So as you think about a comprehensive drug-free workplace program, it's not just drug testing, but it's also alcohol testing as well. And it's not just drug testing for everything but marijuana, because some companies have been tempted to drop marijuana from their drug test panel. You've got to keep testing for marijuana because you're liable for the behavior and the actions of your employees who, while representing the company, may be high on marijuana or inebriated and cause an accident, harm another person, you'll be responsible for that. And if you have no way to go back and show that you're making a good faith effort to prevent these types of things from happening, you'll be fully exposed to increased liability. So those are the statistics to sort of set the stage. I'm gonna now turn it over to Rick to take us through some drug testing 101 and then into some more specific MRO responsibilities. Go ahead, Rick.
All right. Hey, thank you, Bill, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. As Bill mentioned, we'll go through the drug testing 101, just set up some basic outlines of what the drug test entails, and then walk through the roles of the medical review officer. So first, we would like to have a poll question, and I'll turn the time over to Jessica to launch the poll.
Thank you, Rick. So our first poll question today is, do you use an MRO in your drug testing program? So let's go ahead and launch that so you can participate with us. Yes, no, don't know. I'm going to go ahead and share with us real quick. Just give you a few more seconds since the poll may have caught us off guard a second. Okay, it looks like we're slowing down. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll, and I'm going to share with everyone the results. 97% said yes, 3 said no, and no one didn't know. So let's go ahead and hide that poll and turn it back to you, Rick.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. All right, good. I'm glad to hear that a lot of people are using medical review officers. We've seen some things over the years that companies that don't use medical review officers, and I'll share a few of those examples here in a few minutes. So, in short, we want to walk you through the traditional drug testing flow chart. Now, this is a very basic overview, and in the following slides, I'll break it down into more detail. But as you see, there are basically 4 main parts to a drug test. The first one is the collection of the specimen. Then you ship it to the laboratory for analysis. The laboratory in a DOT situation releases it to a medical review officer, and in non-DOT situations, positives and other results get shipped over to the medical review officer. They review it, and then they release the results to the employer. Now, going a little bit of a deeper dive into the drug testing laboratory-based process, you can see this flow chart here. Oh, let's go back one. So with this, as you can see, this is a lot more detailed of all the things that can happen to a specimen in its life cycle. Now, we've highlighted in orange all of the areas that an MRO will potentially or do touch a lab-based drug test. And so you can see a medical review officer does have their hands, the ability to place their hands or their influence on a lot of the part of the drug testing of the drug test during its life cycle. Real quick, we broke it down to an unsuccessful collection where a donor either refuses, or a donor or a collector makes a mistake on the custody and control form, and either a correctable or a fatal flaw. As you can see here, the donor sent in for a collection, the collection process begins, the collection's successful, and the specimen is shipped to the laboratory. Sometimes those specimens get lost, or they just get bounced around the country for a little bit before they make it to the laboratory. And we've even had cases where specimens have been destroyed in shipping. Sometimes they'll get crushed in shipping. We've had them ran over by delivery trucks, as well as bags open at FedEx and UPS facilities. And so sometimes the specimens just don't make it. And then in those cases, the MRO does have to cancel those results. So they get, if they can obtain the custody and control forms, identify which specimens were lost or destroyed, and then a process to cancel those. Next, collector makes a mistake. Sometimes there are fatal flaws. One example of a fatal flaw is the collector fails to print and sign their name. So there's no record or no evidence, rather, that who collected the specimen. In that case, the MRO has to reject or cancel the specimen and report it out to the employer as canceled. The next one is a correctable flaw. Sometimes the collectors they fill out the custody and control form, and they print their name, but they forget to sign their name. And that's a correctable flaw. So the collector is notified. they're asked to sign an affidavit that says, yeah, I printed my name, I just forgot to sign. And if they sign that affidavit and they get it back to the MRO, that can be corrected, and the specimen can go back into the screening process of the laboratory. If the collector fails to respond and the MRO can't get an affidavit signed by the collector, then it results in a canceled test. In addition, if everything goes fine and the specimen gets to the laboratory and it goes through the lab screening process, you can see there's a few pitfalls here that can slow the result down or slow the test down. But you can also see we've highlighted the areas that the MRO touches that specimen or that sample, that result. And with this, so the specimen goes, it's collected properly, it's sent to the laboratory, and it goes through the screening process. If it's non-negative, it goes into a confirmation process, and after that confirmation process, the results are sent over to the medical review officer for review. The MRO makes attempts to reach the donor. If they're successful and they get a hold of the donor, sometimes the donor makes the MRO's job easy. They just simply admit to use and say, yeah, I do smoke marijuana and I'm not going to quit. So you can go ahead and release the results to my employer as such. Other times when it's other drugs, the donor may have a prescription for it. And so if the donor has a prescription for it, the MRO asks them to get the prescription over to them for a review. The donor then provides the prescription. The medical review officer reviews it. If the prescription is valid and it accounts for the drug that was tested positive, then the MRO will overturn the result, meaning they'll release it as a negative to the employer. But then on some occasions, we do see it where the prescription is not valid. Over the years, we've seen some pretty interesting things. In my career specifically, we've seen donors Photoshop or cut and paste prescriptions in an attempt to create a valid or what looks like a valid prescription. And in those cases, when the MRO does some deeper diving, they'll call the pharmacy or they'll call the prescribing physician. They find out the prescription is not valid. If that's the case, the result is then released as a verified positive. So with this, next we go into some general responsibilities and qualifications for the use of an MRO. And so in short, the MRO does a few of the things. We want to talk about some of the drug testing methodologies before we jump all the way into the MRO. And that is, we do have a couple of 5 different ways that a lot of drug tests are performed today. The most common, as Bill mentioned earlier, is the lab-based urine. Next, oral fluid is gaining popularity. We're seeing more and more companies use it either supplementally or just use it, period. They'll combine oral fluid with lab-based urine to use both in different circumstances or different reasons for tests. In addition, hair testing is still very popular. It does, as everybody knows on the call, it gives a little bit longer window of detection, typically 90 days if you're using head hair, and so that it's still a great option for pre-employment testing. Then you've got urine point of collection testing, or we call it in the industry POCT. These are rapid devices that give quick results to rule out positives in most cases. A lot of companies use these to quickly screen employees, and then they can get a negative test. In the event it's positive, they will ship it to the laboratory for confirmation. Some states require that, and POCT is not allowed, I'm sure as everybody knows on this call, for DOT purposes or tests. Then lastly, oral fluid point of collection testing is also a viable option for employers, and some of these are used in conjunction with other methods of testing. And then the last one we listed here is the use of the electronic custody and control form. This has been around for a long time, and DOT started using it in 2015. It does streamline the process, and it eliminates a few of those errors that I mentioned on the previous slides. The collector's name is pre-printed once the collector logs into the ECCF platform, and so you can't have a fatal flaw using the ECCF in that scenario. Next, we talk about the MRO. They do ensure an accurate result. They, as we mentioned earlier, they interview the donor. They have personal involvement in this, And so they receive their lab results from the laboratory, they review those, and then they reach out to the donor and they interview them. The DOT regulations refer to the MRO as the gatekeeper of the results. And in following slides, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the responsibilities and the roles that the MROs play. So with this, the MRO, they review the laboratory results, they interview the donors, and they look for valid medical explanations. In addition to this, they can talk to certifying scientists and pharmacies, even the prescribing physicians. And this last one's interesting, collectors or collection site managers. I've worked with MROs over the years that if a collector is a frequent flyer, if you will, they make mistakes on a regular basis. The MRO staff knows who those collectors are, and they try to help by correcting those errors. And so oftentimes medical review staff will reach out to collectors or collection site managers to discuss issues that continually arise. So now we have one more poll question number 2.
Thank you very much, Rick. Let's move on. Which drug testing method or methods does your company use? So as we launch this poll, we invite you to participate. Lab-based urine, oral fluid, hair testing, urine point of collection, or oral fluid point of collection. And this was set up to just select one. So if you use more than one, of course, please select the one that your company uses the most. And we appreciate your feedback. We'll just give you a few more seconds to participate. Okay, it looks like we're slowing down. So we'll go ahead and share the results of this poll. And we have 86% said lab-based urine, and then 11% with urine point of collection testing, and 4% with oral fluid point of collection testing. And we'll go ahead and turn the presentation back over.
All right, thank you, Jessica. That is, and we'll that's kind of what we expected. Urine, lab-based urine is still very prevalent, and I think we'll see more oral fluid as time goes on. Moving on with the MRO, some of the as Bill mentioned earlier, the role of the MRO is indispensable, and a mantra that we've had around the industry for a long time are two, and do it right or don't do it at all. And the second one is, if in doubt, throw it out. Remember, drug testing is it is a safety program, and it was quoted as, somebody quoted it saying, it's an unwarranted search in the name of safety. Now with this, we always err on the side of the donor. So if there are issues with the specimen, whether that might be oftentimes an invalid result from the laboratory, something went wrong and we just don't know what it is, we'll in those situations, the donor is oftentimes retested. Now, if it could be identified what was wrong with the specimen, for example, if it was adulterated or substituted, and the laboratory can identify what it was substituted with, then it moves into the category of a refusal. But by and large, the industry leans and errs on the side of the donor, and so with that, it's never considered a gotcha program. This is the drug testing program is always couched in the framework of safety. So with this, using an MRO, it does ensure that the drug test is done right. The third bullet point there, as you can see, there's no doubt about the final result, whether it be positive or negative. And this helps both the employer and the employee. Bill mentions the gold standard of drug testing. You send the sample into the laboratory for analysis, so it's all positives are confirmed, is what that means. And if the initial screen was non-negative, it will be confirmed by a second testing method, usually GCMS or gas chromatography mass spectrometry. And once it's confirmed positive, it will be sent over to an MRO who would interview the employee and rule out any legitimate medical explanations before the results released to the employer. Today, even with so many options available, for how to conduct a drug test, lab confirmation process and MRO verification remains essential. We have seen some employers that are tempted to cut corners in an ill-advised attempt to speed up the process or save money by skipping the confirmation test or bypassing the verification of results by a medical review officer. I met with one company once with a sales rep present, and the company, we talked about a medical review, and the HR director, she said, "Hey, I've got a question about that." She says, we don't use an MRO, but we do have a former addict, and we have them look at all the positive results, and we ask the employee for any prescriptions they might be taking, and then we have this employee who is a former addict kind of take a look and see if these would account for the positive. Do you think that's a good idea? And the salesman, I didn't have to say anything. The salesman jumped in and he said, "No, that's actually that's the role of the MRO. That's primarily what they're supposed to do." So with that, the addict, while he might have street cred and understand what some of the drugs might do, probably not the best person to have reviewing your drug test results. And so by the end of the meeting, they were considering using a medical review officer. And the last bullet point here, however, doing so is a prescription for trouble, as both the confirmation testing and the medical review process represent the right way to conduct a drug testing. There are actually state laws. Some states require the use of an MRO, and so in those states, if you're not using an MRO regularly or you're not using an MRO period, please check with your state, the states that you operate in, and make sure that you're compliant with those state laws and statutes. We're going to talk next about 3 reasons to use an MRO, and then we'll talk about the return on investment. But the use of a qualified MRO achieves 3 important objectives. First, it establishes a layer of protection from liability for the employer. The employer doesn't have to do what my previous example represented, and that is they don't have to get into asking employees or potential employees for any prescriptions that they may be on. And so they don't have to, they're not asking questions that they shouldn't be asking. Number 2, it helps employers comply with legal requirements, state laws that require MROs, and of course federal laws under the DOT that require MROs to be used. And then 3rd, it helps avoid accusing someone of failing a drug test when in reality there was a legitimate medical explanation for the positive test result. And it's good to note that it's not always a prescription that somebody uses, but sometimes it's a procedure that they had done. For example, they could have gone to the dentist or the emergency room in the previous few days, and they were prescribed something that was in their system at the time of a drug test. And if that's the case, then those items are identified, and they may account for the positive test result as well as prescription medications. The MRO process is designed to protect the integrity of your drug testing program. As we mentioned earlier, interviews with the individual whose sample is confirmed positive is part of the medical review process. So the doctor does talk to each individual that tests positive, or attempts to talk to each individual that tests positive. Their job is to discover something that the results might be legitimate, meaning they have a reason that the specimen tested positive or the drug is in their system. They also review the custody and control form to ensure that proper collection protocols were followed during the collection process. This is supporting what I had said just a few minutes ago about the MRO's role of reaching out to collectors or collection site managers to discuss issues that happen on the custody and control form or during the collection process. And then lastly, they also identify errors during the collection process that may or can result in the test being canceled. Behind the scenes, the MROs do a lot of work, and oftentimes not all of this is visible to you as the employer. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and to support this, we talked to one major drug testing provider that shared in the previous year the MROs reversed 17% of confirmed positives from the traditional 5-panel drug test. In addition, 21% of expanded opiate panels that included prescription drugs were reversed or overturned. And then the second bullet point, 70% of donors who test positive for prescription drugs can produce a valid prescription. So up to 70% of laboratory positives for prescription drugs can be overturned. So the MRO and their staff are doing a lot of work that employers may never see. And then moving down, medical review officers, they're part of the value. They're a valuable piece and a process to your program, drug testing programs. And then lastly, errors during the collection process that result in tests being canceled. The donor, the MRO, may ask questions specific about those processes that weren't followed, and so they basically create or follow up on the integrity of the process as a whole. Next, we talk about state law and federal requirements for the use of an MRO. We've touched on this before, but we want to go into a little bit more detail. And with that, just as a reminder, some states do require the use of an MRO. When reviewing a state drug testing law, please pay attention to a few key issues. The mandatory state law may or may not include the MRO-related requirement, but if it does, please look at the exact requirement. Some states mirror the DOT and ask that all results go through the medical review officer process, but some don't. Some will just ask or require that the medical review officers review all non-negative tests. And then the last bullet point there, good examples are states that with workers' compensation regulations that require the use of an MRO before any employer can move forward to deny or reduce worker comp benefits. Next, some state laws have mandatory or voluntary laws surrounding the medical review officer. Voluntary laws only apply to those companies that participate in a voluntary program. Many voluntary state drug testing laws follow federal regulations and procedures, and then they require the use of a medical review officer. The last one here is one that we encourage you to check out in the states that you operate in, and that is check and see if a medical review officer is required for both positive and negative tests or just the positive tests. A few examples of these states are New York. The New York Department of Health requires that all drug tests be both reported to an MRO, both positive and negative, before release to an employer. And Maryland, the law specifically requires that an MRO review pre-employment initial screens. Industry-specific laws in Virginia, the use of an MRO is required for the mining industry as well as workers' comp cases. And in Kentucky, they also require the use of MROs in the mining industry. Now down here at the bottom, workers' comp laws. Alabama is one of several states that allow employers to challenge workers' comp claims based on positive drug tests. Employers in Alabama must conduct drug testing in accordance with DOT regulations, even when it is not a DOT regulated test. And then last, other states with similar laws are Arkansas, Illinois, New Mexico, just to name a few. DOT procedures require the use, a number of states require the employers to follow procedural elements of the Department of Transportation regulations in non-DOT drug testing situations. And Tennessee's voluntary drug testing state law participants in the state workers' comp discount program must follow the DOT standards when using an MRO. Same is true for Wyoming and others. The fourth bullet point down there, it's not uncommon for employers to conduct non-regulated testing requests that their MROs follow DOT procedures whenever possible. And DOT regulations include the requirement that MROs review negative tests as well as positive tests. This is important in the sense to keep consistency in your drug testing program. If the process is the same, it speaks to credibility in the employer's drug testing program. And then bottom line there, the review of negative drug tests can provide protections for both the employee and the employer. So it does show a stable, unbiased process. Next, we'll talk about the return on investment of using an MRO. And we ask the question, how do MROs add value to their program? Similar to what we've already talked about, it ensures that no one is falsely accused. They prevent negative results from being declared or deemed positive, and the MRO does identify legitimate explanations for the drug or drugs being in the system, in the donor system. We've over the years we've seen donors test positive for not only one drug, but perhaps up to four or five drugs out of a drug testing panel. And then the MRO review or interview, it offers an environment to keep private information confidential from the employer, keeps the employer from having to delve into those areas where they're asking about medications that the donor may be using. Next, it adds a checks and balances for the program, which demonstrates good faith on the employer's part. This shows that the employers do care about their drug testing program and about their employees. It allows them basically a time to talk about their side of the story. As you see in the last bullet point there, they get to share their side of the story, and that allows the employers to trust all legitimate possibilities were ruled out in cases where the lab result was positive and then the overall verified result is also positive. In conclusion, just one last slide and then we'll have questions and answers. The legal defensibility of this, the science of the drug testing today is typically beyond legal challenges, but that does not mean that such challenges are impossible. In the event of a legal challenge, employers do not want to try to defend a drug test result that has not been verified by a certified MRO, who can attest to the integrity and both the result and the procedures were followed to produce that result. Regardless of the state law requirements, it's always wise to include the services of a medical review officer in your workplace drug testing program. And so with that, we'll turn the time back over to Jessica, bring Bill back on, and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Rick, for that information. And please feel free to send questions that you have for today's presenters into the questions section, and we'll build those into our questions right now. So we do have a couple questions that have been brought up, and one of those is, how many attempts do MROs make to obtain a copy of a custody and control form?
Okay, Bill, I'll take this one if you're okay with that. The MRO staff is a great question, and it comes up a lot, especially from DERs that are waiting on results. This is one of the areas that slow down the drug test results, especially in DOT situations. The MRO needs a copy of the custody and control form to verify that the lab result matches the CCF, or the custody and control form. And so they need to obtain a copy of it. In cases where paper CCFs are used, this is more common than in electronic custody and control form use. But the MRO staff, from my experience, they make several attempts each day to obtain that copy of the CCF. Now, sometimes back in the old days, we had to receive those by fax, and so we could have faxes that failed, or donors that the faxes could fail on either side of the equation there, frankly. And so it did take a little bit of time. It is frustrating for DERs that are waiting for results to come in when the MRO can't get that documentation to start the process. Now, it should be noted, sometimes the MRO will ask the DER or the employer to call the collection site and assist in obtaining a copy of the custody and control form. This is effective in a lot of cases, because a lot of times the employer is just down the street from the collection site, and so when they call, it creates a little bit of a sense of urgency. I had one customer in particular that we asked to do this on a regular basis because the collection site wouldn't respond to us when we were calling as the MRO office, but they would get the document over really quickly after the employer called. So it's from my experience, the MRO staff is making several attempts each day to get those CCFs, because it is vital. They can't move forward without it.
Great, thank you so much, Rick. What things are MROs required to document?
Go ahead, Rick.
Okay, thanks, Bill. You know what, the MRO, they're required to, when they interview the donor, they're actually documenting a lot of almost anything the donor says during the process, just because they are looking for legitimate medical explanations, but they're required to give a Miranda explaining to the donor that they're looking, that the drug test from the laboratory came back positive, and that they are going to interview the donor to look for possible legitimate medical explanations, and that they are going to use the information that they gather to review the result and release those results to the employer. Now, as interestingly, as David from DrugPack said in his introduction, their drug MRO Pro or MRO software oftentimes has little checklists that are built in, and so the MRO can preload questions or statements. For example, the MRO, after giving them medical Miranda, they ask the donor if they have any prescriptions. The donor says, yes, I do have a prescription, or no, I do not. And so the MRO will document that in the note section that the donor said that they had a prescription. Next, they'll ask the question, can you get me a copy of that prescription? And in those cases, the donor will either say yes or no, and then the MRO will ask them how quickly they can get the prescription. Sometimes they can turn that around in 24 hours, meaning the donor gets it to the MRO within 24 hours. Other times, the donor may be a truck driver and out on the road for a few days, and so the MRO will give them a few extra days to produce that prescription. They'll document that as well. And then also, if the donor admits use, that's documented. And so anything that's relevant to the case is most often, is required to be documented. And then oftentimes the MROs will take additional notes just to create a situation where the MRO, if ever asked or inquired about this specific result, it'll trigger their memory to discuss what was talked about during the interview.
Thank you for that. Okay, this question is the next question. Excuse me, the next question. What if a state doesn't have a drug testing law?
I'll take that one, Rick. So as Rick described during the state law portion of the presentation, some states have mandatory laws, some have voluntary laws. And just as a primer, a mandatory law obviously applies to anybody in the state that does drug testing. So if you're in a state like Iowa, you have to comply with that mandatory drug testing law, and it does include some procedural requirements that sort of reflect the DOT regulations. And when I say DOT, keep in mind that some states specifically say U.S. Department of Transportation, others might say SAMHSA, others are more antiquated and refer to the NIDA guidelines, but they're all talking about kind of the same thing, which is 49 CFR Part 40. Many states with voluntary laws, like here in Florida where I live, or in Tennessee or Georgia, they'll just sort of punt on the procedural requirements, including MRO, and defer to SAMHSA. And so in those states, if you're participating in those voluntary laws, you've got to, you've got to use an MRO, and it's got to be in conjunction with those 49 CFR Part 40 guidelines. Now, many states, well, not many, I shouldn't have said it that way. There are a number of states that do not have a dedicated state drug testing law. California is a perfect example. There's so much case law in California, however, that it feels like there is a drug testing law in California. But the reality is there is no dedicated statute for drug testing. And the case law doesn't really sort of get into the procedural requirements. A lot of the case law in California has to do with when someone can be tested, pre-employment testing, random testing, etc. But here's a good rule to follow. You're probably working with, if you're an employer, you're working with a third-party administrator that presumably does DOT testing for many of their clients as well. They're going to be very familiar with the DOT procedures, the 49 CFR 40 standard. And if you're a provider, you're likely, encouraging your clients to try to follow that gold standard. So if you're in a state that doesn't have a state drug testing law per se, like Iowa, for example, and it doesn't have a voluntary law that you're participating in, like in Florida or Georgia or Tennessee, etc., then a good sort of rule of thumb is to always follow that gold standard. Now, I realize that right now the federal regulations for outside of the federal government only allow lab-based urine testing, but the MRO process is the same. Now, some of you may be familiar with the fact that back in October of 2019, SAMHSA issued final guidelines for lab-based oral fluid testing for federal agencies, not for the private sector, but for federal agencies. And those included very specific MRO guidelines for reviewing oral fluid drug tests. And on February 28th of this year, DOT issued a notice of proposed rulemaking for lab-based oral fluid testing, which would procedurally mirror the requirements that came out in October 2019 from SAMHSA. So there are guidelines in place for how an MRO would review both a urine and an oral fluid sample that can be followed even in states that don't have a dedicated state drug testing law. And that's probably a good standard to go by.
All right, thank you so much, Bill. Okay, so let's go on to another question. This kind of is a follow-up to what Rick was talking about before about how many attempts the MROs make to obtain a copy of the custody and control form. The next question was, how many times does the MRO try to contact the donor, and do they leave a message and follow up on that? What's the general consensus there?
Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, good. And this is a great question. Typically, the MROs will make 3 attempts within the first 24 hours, and then they'll make subsequent attempts over the following 24 hours. In the case of the Department of Transportation test results, they need to do this, and then after 48 hours of making attempts, the MRO can reach out to the employer and ask them for their help in getting in touch with the donor. So it's been my experience that they're making at least 6 attempts, and they are leaving messages. Now, this is one of the areas that can go a little bit sideways on the process, meaning sometimes the donors give a wrong number or an incorrect number, and if the MRO can verify that, meaning they call the number that's listed and the person says, nobody by that name lives here, the MRO can then reach out to the employer and say, hey, we don't think we have a good number for this donor. Can you help us out? But as a general business rule, they are making several attempts, and usually 3 is the number 3 in the first 24 hours, and then subsequent 48 hours to reach that donor, because they want to process the result as quickly as they can and get the results back to their customer, the employer. And then with that, it also should be noted that that the MRO does have to wait 10 days after making attempts in a DOT environment before they can release that result as a no contact positive. So I hope that answers the question. Typically 3 attempts in the first 24 hours and up to 3 in the following 24 hours. So the first 48 hours can have 6 attempts. They do leave messages, and they do follow up on those messages.
Great, thank you so much, Rick. Then our next question is there guidance from ODAPSI that all MROs should always issue a safety concern when the employee is taking any type of opioid?
Rick, I got to tell you, I don't know the answer to that one.
Hey, you know what? And we will have to research this to find out if ODAPSI has actually weighed in on it. For DOT tests, the answer is yes. If the donor is taking an opiate or expanded opiate, semi-synthetic opiate, then the MRO, when they find that out during the interview process, they'll typically ask why they're on it, and if they're going to be on it for a long period of time, they're going to put a safety concern in the result. Even if they're on it for a short period of time, they'll still take note of that. The only time I've ever seen an MRO not place it in is if the employee has stopped taking the drug and the MRO verifies the prescription has run out. And so they were tested on the final days of taking the result. Now, in non-DOT situations, MROs that I've worked with also do list safety concerns on those results, because in a non-DOT situation, it's a little bit different than DOT in the fact that we don't know if it's a safety sensitive position. And so it's they do offer that information to the employer. With that said, and this is why I said it gets a little bit messy, some employers have asked medical review officers just to give them a straight positive or negative. And so they've asked the question, or they've requested from the MRO, they say, hey, it's our process that we don't know if they're on a, if they're on any types of drugs. So in the event that one of my donors or one of my employees test positive for a prescription and they have it, please don't tell me that. Just give me a yes or no, positive or negative. You can overturn the result. And that is, I'm fine with the negative result in those cases.
Great, thank you for that explanation. Are there MROs required to verify misleading or subversive excuses?
Some examples of that, Rick.
Yeah, no, this good question. And MROs typically they'll answer the question with the donor, but if it's not a medical procedure or a prescription, the MROs, they really can't verify any story. And it's an interesting one, because if you've ever been a collector, and I'm sure we've got a few collectors on the call on the webinar here, a lot of times MRO or donors just like to tell their story. And so MROs do have a lot of great stories that they hear from donors as to why they may test positive. And most of the MROs that I've talked to have simply said, that's a good story if they have some explanation that isn't in the medical realm, but they'll bring it back to, I'm looking for valid medical explanations as to why you may have tested positive. I know we're getting short on time. There was an example of this. I was at my desk, in fact. It's a personal example. I got a call one night from a donor that had already talked to one of the MROs, and he said, hey, you know what? He says, I've got, I had a situation where I went over to a friend's house right before I took my drug test, and we had some wine with dinner, and I think he slipped some cocaine into my drink, and he says, is that possible? And I said, you know what, let me get back to you. So the next morning I talked to the medical review officer, and she said, you know what, it's possible. However, there's no legitimate medical explanation for it. And so I really, I can't verify that was the cause of it. And even if I could verify it, she says, well, actually, I don't even know how I would verify that. And so the short answer is they're only looking for medical explanations, or valid medical explanations rather, but they do listen to the donors, and then they, and even some cases they may even sympathize, but there's nothing that they can do to verify the story is accurate.
Yeah, and let me just insert here to our audience, because that was great, Rick. Some great questions today, some really good stuff. If there's anything that you still wanted to ask that we couldn't get to, just email us and we'll send out answers. There are a couple of questions that we're gonna do a little bit more research on as well, and we'll send it out to everybody who was on the call today. But a lot of questions today, and I know we have a few more, but we're out of time. But thank you so much for being involved and participating and providing comments. And we have some comments from various people on the webinar today in response to some of our answers, and so we'll get back to you on all of that. We'll follow up for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rick and Bill, for bringing us this information today. On behalf of Current Consulting Group and DrugPack, we hope that you found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording via email. Additionally, this presentation qualified for continuing education credits from SHRM, HRCI, and from CCDAP for those who attended today's live presentation in its entirety. If you have met that requirement, you will be emailed the activity IDs. Thank you so much for your attendance today, and this concludes today's webinar presentation.